thanks everyone for joining us today to one of our very first virtual programs from the Adult Services staff at the Euclid Public Library. But we go through introductions first. My name's Carla Bowman, the Adult Services Manager here at the Euclid Library, and I'll just kind of give a wave. The next is Alyssa, if you'll give us a wave.
Hello.
Mike Stein, the
Hi there.
Assistant Manager of Adult Services. Marjorie Mogg. And the other staff member with us today is Frank. If you'll give a wave, Frank. And as we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know that it's the beginning of summer reading. Well, actually, we're about halfway through. Our summer reading program goes through July 18th. It's for all ages. It is strictly online through our website. If you go to www.euclidlibrary.beanstack.org, there's a place where you can create an account and start to track your reading. And every book that you read, or every 5 hours that you read, counts as an entry into our grand prize drawing. There's a screen that you'd get to create an account. If you've registered in previous years, you can just sign in. This sign-in screen does show a place where you can recover your password or recover a username if you've forgotten that. So we're going to get started in sharing our book recommendations. So the program is What We're Reading, Summer of 2020, and our first speaker is going to be Frank. Frank,
Yes.
if you want to take it away.
Oh, sure. Okay. Thanks. The first book that I'm reading, The Gifts of the Crow by John Marlowe and Tony Angel. Well, everyone has probably had a lot more time these days to look out their window and see what birds are flying about. Not too many people have been paying attention, I think, to the crow. They don't exactly have the best reputation. They're not particularly colorful. Their cawing's annoying, and they're pretty associated with the macabre. But reading through this book so far, they're actually highly intelligent. In fact, so far, scientists think that they're pretty much as smart as dogs or even young children, like toddlers and things like that. It shows that their social structure is actually pretty complicated. They can recognize each other, and they can also recognize human beings too and develop a little bit of relationships with them. That's where the book actually gets its title from. Gifts of the Crow, referring to little things that might not mean much to us, things like buttons and bottle caps, but sometimes a crow would give these sort of things to a human it recognizes and has an affinity for. A while back, I talked about another book called The Hidden World of the Fox. And a lot of the points that that book was trying to make was that these crafty animals like foxes and crows are pretty well adapted to living among human beings. So they do well in the wilderness as they do along our cities. This book covers a lot about the neurobiology of the bird brains as well, and it shows that they're actually the modern scientific tests and experiments that they do with crows show a lot about how really far more advanced they are than we give them credit for. Also, I'd like to point out that they're even able to do tools. If you can see the cover there, you see a little crow kind of bent over. They're able to use things like sticks and sometimes pieces of metal wiring. They can create things like hooks and forks to kind of get at pieces of food that might be otherwise difficult to get to. So I'll be looking forward to finishing that one up pretty soon, and I'll get hopefully a new respect for the birds that are out there that don't always stick out as much as their more colorful relatives. The second book I'd like to talk about is the NES Encyclopedia by Chris Scullion. For those that don't know what an NES is, that's the old Nintendo, the original one that came out in the 80s and lasted until into the early 90s or so. It was a really a big pop cultural hit for its time, and a lot of the games that came out also reflect that 80s, early 90s era. This book contains entries for over 600 games that came out over the lifespan of this system, and each entry has their own little jokes and anecdotes and fun facts to go along with it. So I look forward to looking over those and learning some fun facts about games I've probably never even heard of. Like I said, for every famous thing from the 80s, we all probably have heard of Super Mario or the Ninja Turtles. There's also things that are very much products of their time, but somehow also got video games based on them. So, for example, the Domino's Pizza Company had their Noid mascot. He had his own video game. So I'm kind of looking forward to flipping through the book and seeing what repressed memories come out from that. Also, despite it, of course, being called an encyclopedia, it is not part of our non-circulating reference collection. It is able to be checked out and taken home. Next, I'd like to talk about a sports biography, quasi-sports biography, called Life is Short and So Am I by Dylan Postal. Dylan was born with achondroplasia, which is to say dwarfism, and he had a very rough going growing up. He had multiple surgeries well before his teenage years. Despite all this, his lifelong dream was to pursue the goal of becoming a professional wrestler. It's not a job that is typically associated with short people. It's usually, of course, big, strong, and powerful guys. But he worked towards it, worked his way up the independent scene, and before he turned 20 years old, was able to be signed to the WWE, which is the big worldwide wrestling promotion. Through it all, though, he knew that this tenure was only a temporary thing. It couldn't last forever, but he actually made a pretty solid decade or so long career of it. His claim to fame was playing a character. Of course, a lot of pro wrestlers, they will usually play some sort of character. It's fictional, of course, so they will usually play a bright, colorful character, and his was the leprechaun known as Hornswoggle. It's probably not the most sensitive thing, but then again, this is not high art. But he made a good career of that, and he also got to, through that, he got to fulfill another dream of his, and that is to meet the Muppets. He is a huge Muppets fan and has multiple Muppet tattoos all over him. So that was a big thrill for him. And also, through this book, it shows a lot that he's actually a really devoted family man. He has a son, which he says was a life-changing thing for him, of course, for the better. And of course, one of the joys for that his profession allowed him to do was to able to have the drummer Muppet Animal FaceTime with his son as a special favor. Also, he's no stranger to the Cleveland area. He performs here regularly for independent shows. So I did get to meet him a couple of times, and very nice guy, a dedicated family man, like I said. So I'm looking forward to reading the book and seeing how he dealt with all the difficulties in his life. And then finally, my last book is The King of Random's 52 Random Weekend Projects by Grant Thompson and Ted Slampiak. Now, judging by this cover, it looks like a typical do-it-yourself home repair book, something for repairing drywall and things like that. But the focus of this is that it's actually an arts and crafts book for guys. You're making a lot of kind of quasi-violent materials. You can make your own boomerangs, bottle rockets, even t-shirt cannons, things like that. And there's also ways to make homemade toys, like toy slime or toy clay and things like that. It's highly recommended, of course, that people do this with parental guidance if they're showing this to their kids. But it's all in good fun, and of course, as long as safety precautions are taken, you could learn a lot about like engineering and things like that. I guess he was a former Boeing engineer. Unfortunately, the author Grant Thompson, he was a popular YouTuber, and he passed away tragically in the years since. Thankfully, I think not related to any of the projects in the book, but it is a little bit of a sad note, and I do though kind of look forward to, if not building all these weird contraptions, at least seeing how it could be done or how I would go about doing it if I had the the free time on my hand. So those are the four odd books that I'm reading these days or looking forward to reading.
Thank you, Frank. So next up is Alyssa. She has 5 books to share with us.
Yes, I have a lot of books to recommend. I couldn't really choose which ones. But the first one is A Phoenix Must First Burn. It's a collection of 16 young adult stories, and it's edited by Patrice Caldwell. I really enjoyed this. I took my time reading it just to kind of like go through everything. I will say some of the standout stories for me, I mean, you can read them in any order, but Letting the Right One In, The Goddess Provides, and the hagiography of Starlight, I probably mispronounced that. And The Goddess Provides is by L.L. McKinney, and the Starlight one is by Samoya Dodd. And these stories, they talk about heartbreak, survivalism, colorism, respectively. And I connected the most with these stories. But there are, you know, since there are other, like 16 total stories, there are, you know, other things that it explores, including like time travel and freedom. So I really think that it's a great taste of fantasy writers that are, you know, up and coming, that are making a name for themselves. I really enjoyed it. The next one is a nonfiction. This one is God Save the Queens by Kathy Ian Doley. When I first picked up this book, I was like, I enjoyed the cover, thought it was very beautiful. But I was like, okay, I really kind of want to know a little bit about women in hip hop, even though this is something that's very different for me as a reader, but I did find it interesting and fun. Anyone who is interested in hip hop, you know, or music in general, I think that Ian Doley does a great job in explaining what women were going through at that time, what female rappers face trying to get into the industry and trying to make a name for themselves. One thing that did kind of stand out for me is that even though Kathy Ian Doley is a white woman who wrote this book about Black women, she understood her position while she was writing this. And I think it really shows she was pretty much very careful in telling these stories from these female rappers and hip hop artists. And yes, it covers, I guess, some well-known issues between other artists, which I think is really fun because, you know, you hear about them in the news, especially like if you, not like a while ago was Nicki Minaj and Cardi B. That's actually mentioned in this. And I just thought it was really funny just to get a little bit of a taste, a little bit behind the scenes, especially for something like this. The next one is What Unbreakable Looks Like. This is on my TBR list. Actually, I just picked up the physical book about a week ago, but this one by Kate McLaughlin, it's essentially about a girl who survives being trafficked, and you know that's a tragedy. But you know, for me, I'm not familiar with any other authors that write these kind of stories, and the girl in this, Lex, she's trying to get back to herself, get back to kind of, I guess, being normal. But, you know, she's reflecting back. She had her name changed while she was trafficked. And, you know, as she goes through this, she is assaulted by her so-called boyfriend and his friends. And she has to cope with that. And I really think that, you know, it's very important to hear these kind of stories. And especially think this is really good for young people to read, even though it might be a little intense for them. I think that it's important to tell these stories. The next one is Heart and Hustle by Patricia Bright. I listened to this on audiobook and I thoroughly enjoyed this. I I don't know. I'm just very enamored by Patricia Bright. She's a YouTuber and she has her own hair company and things like that. So just listen to this while I was on the way to work was really awesome. She breaks down her path on how she got to where she was today. And she also, you know, gives sound advice to people who also want to achieve similar goals that she does and things that she wants to avoid. So I really enjoyed listening to this. It was very motivational. And the last one is by Alyssa Cole, When No One Is Watching. This one is not out yet. I believe this one is out in October. But the reason why this one is on my TBR is because Cole normally writes romance fiction, and I love her writing. And, you know, besides the fact that her name's also Alyssa, but I really enjoy her style. She makes me laugh. Like, I laugh out loud when I'm reading this. But this one, it's on Goodreads. It's described as Rear Window meets Get Out. And I didn't know what Rear Window was, so I had to like look that up. And I thought that was kind of interesting what she's trying to do with this. She's trying to give a sinister take on gentrification in Brooklyn, in the Brooklyn neighborhood. So I'm really excited to read this. This is a thriller from her. So yeah, I'm excited. This one's on my top when it comes out.
That's great. Thank you, Alyssa. Marjorie is up next.
Okay, The Voter File by David Pepper is the perfect read for an election year. It blurs the line between fact and fiction and reads almost like tomorrow's headlines. Politics is a crazy game, and one never knows what might happen. The voter file is defined as a database that keeps track of all voters in a district and shapes a campaign's game plan for victory. One person were to gain control of an entire party's voter file, they could manipulate the outcome of virtually every election in America. That's the premise. The investigative reporter Jack Sharp discovered this has happened and that the person behind the hack is determined to turn American politics upside down. The Wall Street Journal described Pepper as one of the best political thriller writers on the scene. And Pepper is an American politician and the chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party, a former councilman of the city of Cincinnati. Another really popular book I'm mentioning today is The Guest List by Lucy Foley. A wedding celebration turns dark and deadly in this deliciously wicked and atmospheric thriller, reminiscent of Agatha Christie from the New York Times bestselling author of The Hunting Party. On an island off the coast of Ireland, guests gather to celebrate two people joining their lives together as one. The groom, handsome and charming, is a rising television star. The bride, smart and ambitious, a magazine publisher. And then someone turns up dead. Who didn't wish the happy couple well? And perhaps more important, why? So you'll need to read this book to find out. The next book is Why We Swim by Bonnie Sue. Many of us can't swim in our outdoor pools this summer, so why not read about swimming? It's an immersive, unforgettable, and eye-popping perspective on swimming and on human behavior itself. Why We Swim is propelled by stories of Olympic champions, a Baghdad swim club, Japanese samurai swimmers, and even an Icelandic fisherman who improbably survives a wintry 6-hour swim after a shipwreck. She also shares a look at some of the top swimmers past and present like Phelps and Ledecky. This book investigates what it is about water, despite its dangers, that seduces us and why we come back to it again and again. And then I chose a classic, a book to completely take me away from our unsettling times, Whose Body by Dorothy Sayers. Dorothy Sayers was a playwright, scholar, and acclaimed author of mysteries, best known for her books starring the gentleman sleuth, Lord Peter Wimsey, who was first introduced in her first novel, Whose Body? Wimsey undertakes an investigation to discover the identity and the murderer of a man who is found in a bathtub wearing nothing but eyeglasses. An ingenious and intricate plot follows that essentially announced the advent of a new star in the firmament of detective story writing and one of the first. Sayers died in 1957, but her books still thrill and delight. This is a nice time to take a step back in time and away from all the worries of today. Then I thought I would include a book about history. You Never Forget Your First by Alexis Coe. This is an instant New York Times bestseller. In her form-shattering and myth-crushing book, Coe examines myths with mirth and writes history with humor. You Never Forget Your First is an accessible look at a president who always finishes in the first ranks of our leaders. Of course, we're talking about George Washington. Alexis Coe takes a look at our first and finds he is not the man we remember. With irresistible style and warm humor, You Never Forget Your First combines rigorous research and lively storytelling that will have readers, including those who thought presidential biographies were just for dads, inhaling every page. The book tells us his likes and dislikes, closest friends and frenemies, and greatest hits and pettiest acts, favorite food and drink, and favorite writers. I enjoyed it. And it's digestible amounts of information that you just seem to retain. I've also included What Makes a Marriage Last by Marlo Thomas and Phil Donahue. Power couple Marlo Thomas and Phil Donahue have created a compelling and intimate collection of intriguing conversations with famous couples about their enduring marriages and how they have made them last through the challenges we all share. And it includes 40 celebrated couples with long marriages we've admired, from award-winning actors, athletes, newsmakers, to writers, comedians, musicians, and of course, former US President and First Lady Carter. Another mystery, which is one of my collections, is 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson. From the hugely talented author of Before She Knew Him comes a chilling tale of psychological suspense and an homage to the thriller genre tailor-made for fans. The story of a bestseller who finds himself at the center of an FBI investigation because a very clever killer has started using his list of fiction's most ingenious murders. These include Agatha Christie's ABC Murders, Patricia Highsmith's Strangers on a Train, Ira Levin's Death Trap, and James Cain's Double Indemnity. The killer is out there watching his every move, a diabolical threat who knows way too much about Malcolm's personal history, especially the secrets he's never told anyone, of course. To protect himself, Malcolm begins looking into possible suspects. And then I'm going to finish my list with 100 Techniques by America's Test Kitchen, the absolute best way to do almost anything in the kitchen. I think a lot of us are spending a lot more time cooking and in the kitchen, and this might be a good time to brush up on our cooking skills. The first book on technique from America's Test Kitchen showcases 100 groundbreaking techniques that will transform your cooking life, paired with more than 200 creative modern recipes that put the techniques into real-world home kitchen practice. The first section, Essentials Every Home Cook Should Know. Middle section, Techniques You Didn't Know You Couldn't Live Without. And the final section, the bucket list, gives you the know-how to make dreamed about projects come true. And I read and listened to all of these books through Overdrive. They're all available as ebooks and e-audio books. I enjoyed them all, and I think you might as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjorie. Okay, next up is Mike.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for logging in. And I think we've got some good recommendations so far. Frank's book on 52 projects for the weekend, I think I need some things to do. That'll be the one off his list that I'm going to read. And Alyssa's book about hip hop, I'm a big music fan, so that would be the one I'll pick from her. And Marjorie, I'm really tired of reading about politics, but that voter book sounds important, so that's the one I would pick from you. But of course, everyone should read my books first. So here they are. And I got 4 of them, and they're kind of 2 and 2, similar in a couple different ways. So the first 2, you see there on your screen, Rust, a memoir of steel and grit, and Fights is also a memoir. These both came out at the beginning of March, right before this pandemic started. So they're new books, and we'll start with Fights. I order the graphic novels for the library, so they all come across my desk before they get put on the shelves, and I look through them, and this one just caught my eye. Started reading it and wanted to keep going. So this is a memoir of Joel Christian Gill, who is someone I do not know in the comic book graphic novel world. He's not a big name, maybe he will become one. He's written a couple of kids graphic novels. He is currently an associate professor of illustration at Massachusetts College of Art and Design. So this is a memoir of him growing up poor in the 1980s. He moves with his single mother between the city and the countryside in the South, and he just deals with everything that comes along with poverty, with being Black and in the South, called racial slurs, all kinds of things like that. And it's physical fights, it's fighting emotionally, a lot of different things like that. I don't know if you can see it very well, I thought the art was pretty cool, so I'll hold that up and see if you can see much of the art. But that was one thing that attracted me to it, and it's kind of like the Charlie Brown comics. He doesn't show a lot of the adult faces, especially his own mother and other relatives, aunts and uncles, kind of like in Charlie Brown where they have the voice. So it's more focused on him and his friends and kids. And it just shows him growing up, how he got through it all. A couple things I really liked about it is 2 times he talked about the library in his town as a safe haven for him. And he also has a good friend named Mike that helped him get through things. So I thought that was pretty cool. And this one is available on Hoopla, one of our online services, the only one of my books that is available on there. Also, of course, in book form, if you can get a hold of that. Now, Rust, a memoir of steel and grit. It is the Clevelander that wrote this. Her name is Elise Colette Goldbach. And this one got a lot of press when it first came out, and it was excerpted in The Scene. So I read it back then in early March when they did that, and I've been looking forward to getting a hold of it, and finally did just in the last week, and I read it in like 2 days. It's really a great book about Cleveland, about the steel mill, about growing up around here, and also it's similar to Fights because the writer, Elise Colette Goldbach, grew up in poverty. She also had a lot of mental issues. She got a job finally at ArcelorMittal in 2016. So she was, I think at that time, closing in on 30. She was still in her 20s. So a young woman in her 20s working in a steel mill, very rare. So it's kind of about the steel mill, but more so about her growing up in Cleveland and dealing with poverty, growing up in poverty, and also having mental issues and how all that helped get her through all that and grow as a person. You learn a little bit of steel mill history. You learn a bit about how the people in the mill do the work, the different characters in the mill. There's a lot of backbreaking work, as you would expect, in the mill, so you get a little taste of that. One scene that really stood out is they're above this big molten vat of zinc that they have to skim off, what they call dross. I guess it's just imperfections when the zinc melts and whatever else they put in to combine with it. And they have to take these big rakes and lean over the molten zinc and scrape it off into some, I'm not sure exactly where it goes. There's a robot that eventually scoops all of it. I have to push it over to the robot. So just backbreaking work. And she didn't do that job very long. She had a chance to bid out of that. So just a couple things like that makes the book very interesting. And now she is an adjunct professor at John Carroll University, my alma mater. So that's another connection I had to the book. And like I said, I went through it in a couple of days. It's a really good read. You can get it in book form. You can also get it on Overdrive in both ebook and audiobook form. So those two are kind of similar, both being about, tough times growing up, and both were put out this year. So my next two books came out a few years ago, each of them. Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie and Defending Jacob by William Landay. They are similar in that way. Defending Jacob came out in 2012 and Americana came out in 2013. They're both the third novel of each author, and neither one has written another novel since then. So maybe they're resting on the laurels of both of these because both are made or being made into television shows. Defending Jacob is just put on to Apple TV as a miniseries, and Americana it was supposed to have been, I don't know, already on, ready for this HBO Max that they're putting out. But I think they were going to be filming it this year, and then of course the pandemic came and delayed it. So I guess they're still planning on doing it. It's going to star Lupita Nyong'o, but I don't think they filmed it yet. So I don't know when it'll come out. But Defending Jacob came out, like I said, in 2012. It was a bestseller at the New York Times. The Apple show stars Chris Evans. It's about small town just outside of Boston. Andy Barber is the assistant district attorney, and a 14-year-old boy in town is murdered. So of course he's called to the scene and he's going to be prosecuting the case. And then it turns out that his son is implicated as a suspect. So it's a really good thriller. It goes back and forth between making you think the kid did it, making you think somebody else did it. The parents defending Jacob, that's the son's name, Jacob. Parents doing things that you might think you wouldn't do, whether you were just a regular citizen or the district attorney. How far would you go to defend your son? Just a very fast-paced thriller with all kinds of things thrown at you. Makes you wonder what you would do in that situation. And the ending is just comes out of nowhere and just smacks you upside the head. Now, the TV show, you might want to watch it for Chris Evans, but I did watch it just because I want to see how they treated the ending, and it's a different ending. So I recommend the book over the TV show, but isn't that the way it always goes? And then finally, Americana. So this is one that's not actually a library book. We do have copies of it, of course. But I got at Barnes & Noble one time. You see the buy two, get one free. I always fall for that and get a bunch of books that sit on my shelves for years. And this is one of those that's been on my shelves for who knows how long. It came out in 2013, won the National Book Critics Circle Award for fiction. And I should have read it when I got it because I read it a couple months ago and I thought it was excellent. It's about a woman named Evelyn. She's Nigerian. She and Obinze fall in love in secondary school, and their plans are to leave Nigeria, come to America. So Evelyn was able to do that. Obinze was not able to get a visa to go to America. He goes to Britain. So it kind of follows both of them, but more focuses on Evelyn and just her living in America, how different it is, what it's like for Black people, and also what it's like for African Black people who kind of see themselves as a different strata. Some places in Africa, some countries they come from, look down on other countries that people come from. But then when you come to America, they're kind of all treated the same. So you get a lot of how she adapted to America. And I'm sure there's a lot of biography of the author put in there, but it is a novel. And it just follows those characters along as they deal with all that. And I just thought it was a great book and wish I had waited so long to read it. So both these books are available on Overdrive in both e and audiobook form. And I think these are probably the two of mine that you're most likely to find on the shelves because they are older books, even though they were very popular at the time they came out. So those are the four I recommend, and hopefully you can find at least one of those to enjoy.
Thanks, Mike. So I'll finish us off with my four books. The first one there on the left is called Old Bones by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. And the reason I chose these two books that you're looking at, the Old Bones and Nichol Boys, is they kind of tie into our summer reading theme, which is dig deeper. They're both kind of have an archaeological start, at least to the book. So the one there on the left, Old Bones, is there's this new diary that comes to light about the Donner Party. That's that wagon train that went to California and had a really bad end. They got stuck in the mountains over the winter, and things were not great. So it suggests that there's this third camp where some people that were part of that party kind of stayed. And so they set up an archaeological excavation, and that kind of goes on from there. So these two guys, Preston and Child, write a lot of thrillers, and some of them have kind of a supernatural bent. That's not really in this one, but it does just take off. They're very fast reads, very much like a lot of action, thriller type. The next one, the Nichol Boys, is different. It won the Pulitzer Prize this year. It starts off with an archaeological find too. They're building a new office park in Florida, and as they're building, they're discovering bodies. And it turns out in this land that they're digging in, that it was once a boys' reform school. There's a secret cemetery and unmarked graves, and they have to do a big investigation. And from that, the author then goes on to talk about, and he creates a character, a young Black boy who's living in the 60s, and he gets sent to the reform school, and the really terrible place. They mistreat all the boys that are sent there, white and Black. They beat them. It's really not a good place. But I think the author's point here is that those traumas really stay with you throughout your whole life. There's more to the story, and it's actually based loosely on an actual reform school that was in Florida that had a really bad reputation. My last two there are kind of lighter reads. The one on the left, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, I just love that book. It was so good. And it's about a woman who, in her career, she's the most glamorous actress in Hollywood, and she's kind of an Elizabeth Taylor type person. And she's telling her story to a young reporter, and just kind of goes throughout her career from the 50s to the 80s, and the 7 husbands she had. And it was just really wonderful read. I loved it. It was so engrossing. And the next one there, Things You Save in a Fire by Catherine Center, is a light read. The main character is Cassie Hanwell. She works as a firefighter, and she's the only firefighter in her firehouse in Texas. And she's doing great. She's got a great career. She's very good at her job. And then she kind of runs afoul of a politician. And when that happens, work gets kind of stressful for her. So at the same time, her mother's going through a diagnosis, and she needs somebody to take care of her. So they're estranged, but mother begs Cassie to come take care of her. So Cassie decides to leave town. She packs herself up, moves across the country, and takes care of her mother, and also gets a job as a firefighter at another, the local firehouse there. And there's a lot more to the story. It has a little bit of kind of a light mystery to it. There's some serious moments, there's funny moments, little touch of a romance, and it was really a wonderful book. I would highly recommend all 4 of the ones that I've talked about today. So that covers all of our book recommendations. I do want to mention that we have a social justice book discussion coming up on Thursday, July 16th at 6:30. We're going to talk about Good Kids, Bad City, and this is about a true story that happened in Cleveland. The screen there shows you how you can get the book. So if you're interested, you can get a physical copy here, or there are ebooks around, and there's audiobook on Hoopla. I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank the staff for all of your recommendations. One of the great things that I think about the way we do this is because there's so many of us, we get a lot of variety in the books that we recommend. So we hope that you found something here or something piqued your interest, and maybe you'll check something out and pursue that.